All right, good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. We're delighted to have you here with us. I want to welcome you on behalf of Southern Methodist University and the Center for Faith and Learning to our annual Spring Symposium, which this year focuses on the relationship between faith, spirituality, and mental health. I'm Matthew Wilson. I'm the director of the Center for Faith and Learning, as well as professor in the Political Science Department here at SMU. And we have a great panel this evening. I think will really provide us some interesting food for thought, some great discussion back and forth. Before we begin, before I introduce our speakers, I want to thank a couple of people. First of all, I really want to thank the Thoughts Foundation. They have underwritten this entire event. It is thanks to their generous contribution to the Center for Faith and Learning that we're able to do this evening. And so we're very grateful for their contribution to that makes this event possible. I also want to thank and acknowledge our university chaplain, the Reverend Lisa Garvin. The Center for Faith and Learning operates under the auspices of the chaplain's office. And so our partnership with the chaplain's office is really critical in all that we do, including this symposium that you're at this evening. I also really very sincerely want to thank Devin Hood of the Center for Faith and Learning. Devin has done tremendous work in making this event tonight possible. All of the logistics, all of the organizational effort that went into both the reception and into this event itself would not have been possible without her great work. So we're very grateful. The mission of the Center for Faith and Learning at SMU is to promote serious integration of intellectual and spiritual, to highlight the way that the life of the mind, the intellectual life, could and should inform our faith and our religion, and also to highlight the way that the perspectives of faith and spirituality can contribute to all of our various disciplines in the university, to understanding the most critical questions and critical problems of human being. To that end, we sponsor a variety of programs, including our signature Spring Symposium every year, that look at critical intersections between the life of faith and these interesting and important questions. We've done programs in the past on faith in the arts. Last year we did faith in the media. Tonight, as I say, we're delighted to bring a program on faith and mental health, faith and emotional well-being. To that end, we have three distinguished panelists with us that I know you will enjoy hearing from. We have as our keynote speaker tonight, Dr. Lisa Miller. Dr. Miller is a professor of clinical psychology at Teachers College of Columbia University, and she also holds an appointment in psychiatry at Columbia University Medical School. She's the founder of the Spirituality Mind Body Institute, as well as the best-selling author of both The Spiritual Child and The Awakened Brain. We have also with us tonight the Reverend Dr. Len Pace. He's the chaplain at Oxford College of Emory University, as well as an elder in the United Methodist Church. He was previously associate chaplain at Wofford College. And in addition to his considerable experience working with and counseling students, he is the author of The Sacred Year, a spiritual journey through the liturgical year. We have also with us Dr. Farnoosh Noori. And Dr. Noori is clinical assistant professor in SMU's counseling program. She's also a practicing psychotherapist. Her approach to psychology and mental health is deeply informed by the Sufi Islamic spiritual tradition. She is the author of So Long Depression and soon to be released So Long Anxiety. There are more extended biographies of all of our panelists in the program, which I would encourage you to pick up. But without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Miller. We will then hear from our other panelists, Dr. Pace and Dr. Noori, and have some dialogue and discussion amongst the three of them at the end. And then I think at the end, if time permits, we'll have a few questions from the audience. So let me welcome Dr. Miller.
Hello. I have so been looking forward to this evening, and it's a tremendous joy to share with you the science on spiritual and religious life, the foundational to health, wellness, relational ethics, and flourishing. It's a joy to share this science, in particular, the university that has held on to spiritual values. And so I hope so much that you'll jump in and share your perspective as we dig in further this evening. Many of you know that across all decades of life, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, but particularly amongst Gen Z right now, we have an unparalleled challenge. We've never had a challenge in the past 150 years where we've seen as elevated rates of addiction, depression, anxiety, and even suicide. The rate of death by suicide in Gen Z rivals the rate of death by auto accident. And that pushes down now into middle school. So it's certainly not by cancer or COVID that Gen Z faces parallel. The pandemic amongst Gen Z is suicide. Now that has an answer. That has an answer. Because with the sharp escalation in the diseases of despair has been concomitantly a sharp decline in the rates of personal spiritual life, family, faith observance, and the two indeed statistically go hand in hand. Every single human being on earth, as we're born with 2 eyes, 2 ears, and a nose, is also born with an innate capacity for spiritual life. Yellow circle. And in the gray circle are represented our rich, beautiful faith traditions across the globe. Whether I am Christian, Catholic, Jewish, Hindu, Jain, whatever Buddhist my tradition may be in the gray circle, 2/3 of people in our country are at the intersection. They say that my spiritual life is held in the beauty of ascendant practices, the sacred texts, the community of my faith tradition. 2/3 of people in our country. 30% of millennials, more with each younger generation and fewer with each older generation, are in the yellowing yellow alone. They say, I am spiritual, but I am not religious. Whether or not we have developed the embrace of the faith tradition, we are all innately spiritual beings. Now, as incarnate beings, every human experience has a narrow docking station. And by this, I do not wish to claim biological reductionism, but rather that there is a correlation between profound spiritual experience, and in particular, people who sustained a spiritual experience, and broad and pervasive regions represented in red of cortical thickness. The cortex is processing power. We published this in JAMA Psychiatry in 2014. Broad and pervasive regions represented in red are found in people with a sustained spiritual life who say at time 1, my personal spiritual and religious life is highly important to me. I turn to God for guidance in times of difficulty. When I have a tough decision to make, I ask what really does my higher power want me to do. My family is a sacred home. Walking through life day in and day out, looking through our red brain, is a life walked on spiritual bedrock. And when we live this way, when we choose to practice and live this way, over 8 years in this study, we develop a stronger cortex in precisely those regions that are not thick, but thin, in people with recurrent major depression, which means we have evidence that sustained spiritual life is neuroprotective against recurrent major depression. I get back to our pandemic. And I invite you in these next few minutes to consider how the lens of science can be helpful to institutional transformation. You have a head start. You're doing a great deal of this already here at SMU. But our country has a pain in our heart. There's a hole in the heart and it's the size of the red brain. And I think we can get there. But it is a deliberate choice. There's a deliberate choice amongst our institutions. And I will share with you that our institutions who make the most vital and intensive change based on this science in the past 3 years has been the United States Army. The United States Army has an innovations office. And about 4 years ago, I got a call and they said, we've read The Spiritual Child, that was the first book. And then they read the references. They read all of the scientific articles in the back. This body of science describes the challenge that our soldiers face, which is, of course, the same American challenge that all institutions to receive young adults face. Whether it is the military or higher education or entry-level jobs, this is our American challenge, and the Army has offered a way of making institutional transformation based on this science. So I share this now with you in the hope that you might find its relevance a lens through which to look in your own professional band of leadership. Whether it is through prayer, meditation, whatever our transcendent practice may be, whatever the practice through which we come to say, I turn to my higher power for guidance. That is not only a belief, it's a lived, dynamic, felt relationship. Engaging the Neurodocking Station, published in June, can explain why it is that half of the young adults in our country are suffering the disease of despair. Traditionally, we have located diagnoses at the level of the individual. He has major depression. She meets criteria for dual diagnosis. But when half of the young people meet criteria, it is no longer best understood at the level of the individual, but in the air and water of our culture. How did we get here? How did we get here? Well, as many of you know, 40 years ago, in the good attempt to be inclusive, we threw religion out of the public square and actually became radically exclusive. We lost the power of pluralism. Where you tell me about Christmas and Easter, and I share with you about Hanukkah, and my dear friend tells me about Diwali, when we speak of the birth of our children and the crossing of our ancestors in the most sacred and reverent ways. There's been a desanctification of who we are in the public square. And it's been to the peril of the formation of our young adults. 40 years is long enough for someone to grow up, have a child who grows up, and is at your door. Again, whether we speak of higher education, the military, or entry-level jobs, this is our American challenge. We've become a spiritually non-conversant society. And we know that when there's silence, there's a problem. So I remember when my grandmother was dying, she wrote articles to the paper saying, I am dying of cancer. Why? Because everyone said, she has cancer. They didn't talk about it. Where there's silence, we haven't handled this. Well, now is our opportunity to become spiritually conversant. And I hope that this science will be one more arrow in your quiver as healers, as teachers, as activists, as philanthropists, business leaders, people who shape the world in which we live. What does this roadmap of science say? The first is perhaps the most important finding, which is if we look through the lens of the twin study in science, we can determine the extent to which any human capacity is informed or environmentally formed. Temperament, for instance, whether we're laid back or high strung, whether we're introverts or extroverts, is half inborn, half environmentally formed. I'm a parent of 3 children, and my middle child, who has asked to go by center child, slept in the night at 18 months. And so for 18 months, she woke up 4 times a night. And you remember that little sound? And walked across the house and soothed baby. Half innate, half environment. She is now 20. She sleeps through the night. She's allowed me to share she's a bit anxious. Environmentally formed. IQ is 60% innate, 40% environmentally formed. The capacity through which we experience spiritual life is 1/3 innate. It is our birthright. We are all born with the Neurodocking Station for a transcendent relationship with our higher power and the capacity to see that relationship in our love for one another, relational spirituality. This is our birthright. And it is indeed the same Neurodocking Station through which I talk to who I call God, that I feel God's presence in my love for brothers and sisters. Relational spirituality. Well, this is innate, the 2/3 environmentally formed helps us understand why the dearth of spiritual and religious life in the public square has led to spiritual atrophy in an entire generation. And this is a beautiful generation, souls on earth, that they have not been given what you do here very well. Excuse me, I have back issues. a little trick. Now, the reason that the science offers empirically grounded hope onto the situation is that puberty, 15, 18, 20, 22 to emerging adulthood marks a surge in this innate capacity. We have a growth spurt. Hardwired. We see this through longitudinal twin studies that show a 50% increase in the heritable contribution, which means there is a biological clock from the inside out. What is my meaning? What is my purpose? And I don't mean, am I going to be a teacher or a doctor? I mean, ultimate purpose as a soul on earth. And everything you taught me, mom, dad, pastor, priest, imam, rabbi, I need to now explore that and know that through my own inner heart, my own inner compass. Spiritual coming of age. This surge is a booting up of our capacity, what could be the red brain. And the booting up can feel like a half-empty glass of spirituality, developmental depression, the nagging of the heart for love and transcendence, the hunger of the head to know, well, what is my meaning? What is my purpose? And this can be accelerated by the challenges of what will I major in and where will I go to school and what? I remember when I was 19, I had my first boyfriend and he loved me. And I thought, you love me. This is so wonderful. And after 3 months, he said, I think you're the one. I love you so much. I said, you love me so much. And after 5 months, he broke up with me. I thought, well, wait a minute. My mother said she loved me and she still loves me. How could you stop loving me? And if you stop loving me, is love real? And wait a minute, is love permanent? And are you permanent? And what is the nature of you? And I went into a big existential quandary. I wanted to know all the way down to, I always felt close to God. But I was in a school where everyone said, no, there's no God. No, I always felt close to God. And I wondered for the first time, that's a cold, chilly instinct. So I went to a therapist and I said, I'm incredibly depressed. I said, yeah, my boyfriend broke up with me, but it's much worse than that. I've always felt close to God. And I don't know if there's God. And I took religious studies and I took philosophy, and there was no answer in the way it was taught to my direct transcendent relationship. And the therapist said, I'm sorry, I can see you have depression. Was there something in your childhood where your parents really let you down? And I'm like, no, they were fabulous. And it occurred to me that that was not the therapist for me. So I did what everyone should do, which is fine, move on. And I went to instead to a CBT therapist, cognitive behavioral, and I said, I don't know if God exists. And she said, do you think you're having low self-esteem? And I said, actually, I feel okay about myself. I wanted to know God existed. And I now know, after 25 years of science, that that was a developmental depression. That was the rooting up of deep hunger, through which comes existential inquiry, a quest. It is not easy, it's hard, dark night of the soul, and through it, we draw closer to who I call God. Through it, we ask the biggest questions that might be asked through the nagging of the head, but start to receive an answer through the knowing of the heart. And this process turns out to be the case for 2/3 of college students who go to the mental health clinic. And it turns out to be the case for 2/3 of soldiers in the Army who go to behavioral health. This is coming of age, and it is the most important work we do, spiritually coming of age. Now, when the surge is supported, we form what in my work with the Army we call the spiritual core. Physical fitness for the physical core, spiritual fitness or engagement for the spiritual core. What might be said of our pandemic amongst Gen Z? Well, in peer-reviewed science, American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, Journal of Adolescent Health, there is nothing as profoundly protective against the diseases of despair as a strong personal spiritual life. The yellow circle, whether it's for the rich embrace of our faith tradition, or some people say I'm spiritual but not religious, but when we have a strong spiritual core, and in fact, a teen who says, personal spiritual life is highly important to me. I turn to God, my higher power, for guidance in times of difficulty and receive and perceive, it's a form of perception, an answer in some form. A standard deviation above as compared to below the need, and the tendency to say, a personal spiritual life is highly important, is associated with an 80% decreased relative risk of addiction using DSM criteria to drugs and alcohol. We know that 2/3 of people get out of addiction through AA or NA through a strengthening of spiritual life. Can we get ahead of it? On the arc from treatment to prevention, to wellness, to formation, can we engage in the developmental path of the adolescent, the emerging adult in such a way as to strengthen the spiritual core before they go down the slippery slide of addiction? 60% protective against major depression. Every teen gets depressed, but the deep spiral down into major depression, where we're edgy, where we don't want to connect, where it's hard to get out of bed, that is far less likely. Why? Because when depression starts, we can start to develop a spiritual response to suffering. Building the red brain does not come from having never struggled or never been depressed. It comes from the discovery and the cultivation of a spiritual response to suffering. 70% less likely to jump out the second-story window at a frat party or drive 90 miles an hour. Big risks. You can imagine that the military is very concerned, right, with the strength of the spiritual core and has been data-driven and innovative to move in that direction. And SMU, you are really unparalleled in terms of what universities are doing. Your acknowledgement and centrality of the spiritual core. Now to the pandemic. In a meta-analysis, a study of studies in which all good studies to meet criteria are rolled up into a single protocol. There's a 62% decreased relative risk of completed suicide, and that goes up to 82% when spiritual life is shared. Shared in fellowship, shared in the minyan, the sangha, in the classroom. When we use both the documentation through which we talk to our higher power and see that love towards one another. So I invite you to think of the difference. Not all forms of social support are the same between going to a party, maybe going to a pub, versus going to your faith. How are you looked at? How are you seen? Are you seen transactionally? I mean, I can't tell you the last time I've been at a party and someone hasn't asked, what do you do? Where do you live? What does your spouse do? And I can feel like I'm sort of being calculated. That is a transactional relationship in a social setting versus a transformational relationship, souls on earth, side by side, to encourage, to offer help, on a tough day to offer forgiveness. And sometimes, perhaps at work, a relationship is both transactional, but can also be transformational. And in the classroom, some professors say, I come 10 minutes early and I leave 10 minutes late, just in case. Here's where the rubber hits the road. We've just come out of COVID, and when I speak directly to many university students, they'll say, are we ruined because of this? And I say, actually, no, you're prepared. You may inherit a very dynamic and volatile world. And what you have learned is that the things that look so stable are institutions. Someone's going to take care of our government, whatever that is, crumble. And what was real? What was real? They shift from what I call achieving awareness, which is narrow strategy and tactics of the planning form, to what might be called awakened awareness. I gave you as a gift the book, The Awakened Brain, the red brain that allows us to be an open system to what is life showing them. What is God asking them? I turn to God for guidance in times of difficulty. They were given the opportunity of a lifetime to know what's real and what's not, and how to shift from thinking that we are air traffic control to realizing that we are about 3% of the time in control. And 97% of the time when I push the elevator button, we'll come in 1 minute, 10 minutes, we'll be packed, we'll be empty. We control a bit, but only a bit. And the great dynamism, we engage that in an open way. What is God asking me now? What is life, the deepest force in life, showing me now? an awakened brain. Here, you see 3,000 plus deaths. Everyone in this study by side TSAI has PTSD, has traumatic stress disorder. What's so remarkable is that as you go out the x-axis, there's more and more struggle, sleeplessness, anxiety, reactivity. Up the y-axis are units of growth, post-traumatic growth, more struggle, more growth, more struggle, more growth, more struggle, more growth, until we get so far out that we need support to grow. Struggle is the gateway. Just as there's developmental depression, the knock at the door for spiritual awakening and deepening. Outward challenges, moral challenges, oftentimes spiritual injury. We welcome a spiritual response so that we are, as the chief of chaplains in the Pentagon says, made bigger. It's not a matter of recovery. It's more than that. We're not back to baseline. It is renewal. We are made more. Struggle, depression can be a knock at the door for the becoming illuminated, closer to God, closer to our higher power. How am I doing on time? Am I out of time or do I have 3 minutes? 10 minutes, oh good. So we asked people who had recovered from depression through a deepening of spiritual life to come into the lab and just come in, lie down. They weren't in a state of meditation or prayer, they just lie down, and we put on an EEG cap. And what we found was that people to recover from very difficult times to drive closer to God gave up a certain wavelength, high amplitude alpha. And alpha is a wavelength given off when we are deeply connected with God, connected with God. There's also a wavelength given off when we recover from depression for the time being through SSRIs like Prozac. It jumpstarts that process. And I'm certainly not against drugs if someone is in pain. But when you remove the SSRIs, alpha's gone. And it is often the case that when we remove SSRIs, people get depressed again. So if someone is in pain and if someone is on SSRIs, it is still the opportunity of their lifetime for it to cultivate a spiritual response to suffering. So when my kids were 4 and they were in a tree, I could come over and say, lift them up out of the tree. Well, they are now 18 through 25 and walk the walk of every other young person. Just because your mom talks about this doesn't mean that you don't have to have developmental depression. And as we walk alongside our children, as I walk alongside my now young adult children, I am aware that this is, in fact, the opportunity of their lifetime. It is hard. And what looks like fragility is actually an invitation, a hardwired invitation to the deepening of spiritual life. Because when we do recover and we see alpha come off their head, it stays. In our follow-up studies, it stayed 15 years. It becomes the new normal, the place of being, walking through life on spiritual bedrock. People often ask me about the phone. Well, okay, so the phone is a source of distraction. And I think perhaps the greatest source of distraction is when, do you remember sitting by the bus, the phone, waiting for the bus? It was 5 minutes and it was 10 minutes. Now, if you're thinking about homework, and why did you say that to me? And why did she say that to me? There was some silence. And maybe it was a time when you started to feel God's presence. Maybe it was a time when you started to ask big questions. Your long silence in nature. But if that long silence is carved to tiny little bits like a cut up Picasso, it's harder to form that deep connection. So we looked at generation 1, who recovered from depression through a deepening of spiritual life, and they gave up alpha. And then we looked at generation 2, their kids, who recovered from depression through a deepening of spiritual life, and they gave up alpha. And then we looked at generation 3, and there was no alpha, which to me was probably the most horrifying thing I've ever seen in science. The second challenge with the phone is its content. And here we have reason for hope. Because it is not an inevitability that the phone and social media in particular should be nothing more than a market of comparison. That is not a fait accompli. Problem is not the phone, it is the culture minus the spiritual core, and it is disseminated through the phone. And it looks like this. Mommy, and this is true, my little one. She's 19. Mommy, look here on the phone. There's a girl, she says, I'm in pain. I can't take it anymore. It's been 2 months. I'm going to take my life. So what would you have expected from social media to have followed? Are your parents can help? You got to see somebody or go. You go, girl. It's your life. No one can tell you what to do with it. That is not a problem with the phone. That is a public square minus a spiritual core delivered through the phone. The phone could have been a source of God loves you. Go to your chaplain, rabbi, priest, and mom. Tell your parents. It could have been a source of renewal, of post-traumatic spiritual growth. Now, alpha, which makes this particularly beautiful, perhaps one of the most beautiful findings in science, alpha has another name in another field, same wavelength, same alpha, same wavelength. It's Schumann's resonance. It is the wavelength from the Earth's crust up 1 mile all the way around the Earth, which is in nature. When we are spiritually engaged, our brain vibrates with the wavelength of nature. And the felt sense of oneness with all life and all being is mirrored in the oneness of the wavelength. So I often think my children, certainly my grandchildren, will laugh. They'll say, Grandma was such a riot, so reductive. Measured sacred consciousness by his wavelength. When we return to source, we're connected with all life. And so in this sense, I see science as a quest, it's a journey, really as a pilgrimage. Because what we see is a form of witness. We can stand up one by one and give testimony, or we can look through the lens of science, and what we see is undeniably jaw-dropping statement. And all living beings sharing the same alpha. Cultivating awakened awareness and achieving awareness. Logic at the inner table of human knowing. We have knowers, every one of us. A logician, an empiricist, an intuitive, a mystic, a skeptic. The greatest failure of education in the past century has been to take the skeptic and position them as the bouncer at the door. Skeptic is the place at the table. What science shows us is that when we can ask the question of the head, what is my purpose? Does God exist? And get an answer of heart, intuition, a mystical direction. We connect the regions of our brain in such a way as to have a better brain. These are inorganic, informed forms of knowing, if you will, organic epistemologies. And when we use everyone, the inner table of knowing, we're more innovative, we're more creative, and we're more situationally aware, which means aligned with the kingdom. These are brains, we publish this as well, who are interconnected because they have both a strong spiritual life, but then the mystical experience might be discerned for a question on which they might pray. They are knowers of many forms. I'll give you the science, the references are in the back. This is one more tool in your toolbox as leaders, as guides, parents and grandparents. And I'm so honored to share this with you tonight.
I wish Anush was going next. I'm going to invite you for just a second to put your feet on the floor and maybe let go of anything that might be in your hands. I'm just going to invite you to take a deep breath in. Close your eyes or not. quick one already. On the count of three, I'm going to invite all of us to do it together on 1, 2, 3, in, and then let it go. How about one more? Count of three. 1, 2, 3, in, and let it go. You already heard my name is Lynn Pace. Thank you, Matthew, for the introductions. And I've been a college chaplain for about 20 years. And one of the ways I engage college students is through contemplative practices. It's what I wrote about in my book on the liturgical year, and paired liturgical contemplative practices with each liturgical season. For those of you who are Christian, you probably know them, but if not, those are seasons like Advent and Christmas and Epiphany, Lent, and things that we talk about in the cycle of the liturgical year. Talked about that because I thought that liturgical year was another way of looking at time. We look at time chronologically, but this was a way of looking at it in a deeper way, a way of slowing us down to engage time. Let me tell you, let me rewind, because I didn't know I was going to do that practice, but I felt like we needed it for a moment to take in everything that we heard. Think about what we're going to do with what we heard. I am the college chaplain and have been 14 years now at the birthplace of Emory University, Oxford College. You may not have known this, but Emory did not start in Atlanta. Emory started 36 miles east of Atlanta on the Oxford campus. It's a 2-year campus today, and we have 18 and 19-year-olds. That's who I work with day in and day out for 14 years. Some of you in the room might be 18 and 19. Many of you in the room were once upon a time 18 and 19. And there are many things that have changed, and there are a lot of things that haven't or that don't change about this process of going to college, because it's full of change, it's full of transition, it's full of spiritual development, of bringing what I like to say meaning making. We all, no matter what we consider our faith, our spirituality, this is what you got at Dr. Miller, we're all meaning makers. It's what we do. We have it at our core, and I believe that. So I've talked for years about that, about this idea of paying attention, creating and engaging community, flourishing as we seek to understand and be understood, and trying for all this in a world where things change all the time, even quicker now than they have at any point, I think, certainly in our most recent past. There are lots of things that I want to say, and I'm deeply grateful and engaged with Dr. Miller's work, as is some folks in our counseling center at Oxford. But I think I'm supposed to talk about or be on a parallel course to what she's talking about, so that my words may be informed by hers, but that it specifically comes out of my own understanding and tradition of Christianity. So I want to speak from that place as an ordained clergy person, a Christian, a lifelong United Methodist. That's my particular strand of Christianity. I'm guessing many of you aren't too unfamiliar with it. It is in the name Southern Methodist University, even if you just know that name. And we're here at the Center for Faith and Learning, where, at least in some of the publicity about this, and maybe it's on all the publicity all the time, we take that Charles Wesley adage, a great Methodist or Anglican who we've made Methodist, who said, knowledge and vital piety, right? Well, where I work at Emory, we've made our logo a version of this. We've taken it back to Proverbs. And we've said that our logo, our motto at Emory is the wise heart seeks knowledge. The wise heart, it's a great motto for a university. You get the intellectual life, we know we're about knowledge. It's what we all do. It's what we always do. It's what we're expected to do. But Emory is saying something else in that. You're saying something else with vital piety, but also about seeking wisdom through the heart, trying to keep these two joined, not disjoined. They don't belong in silos. And it's interesting, I think, this phrase, the wise heart seeks knowledge. Most of the words in the sentence are coming back to talk about what we do or try to do at a university. I'm guessing it's at the heart of your own chaplain's office here at SMU, this idea of trying to make sure the intellectual and the spiritual is joined, trying to make sure that it's combined and not separated. It's at the heart of Methodism. And it's at the heart of Christianity, especially centered around this movement that got started and was focused on some 2,000 years ago with this guy named Jesus. So what you've heard tonight, the revelations found in Dr. Miller's work, is good news. It's good news for me as a college chaplain, because now I've got data. I can say, look at this, right? Not just to keep my job. That's part of it. But to say to students, this is good for you. This is like working out. It's like going to class, learning. Just as important as all of those things. It's good news for Christianity, and I appreciate you helping me see the ways in which the church, speaking from the Christian perspective, has missed the mark. In my own generation, growing up, of how, let's not talk about this in the public square, let's make sure we can all get along. We did want to do that, but what we forgot was how important it is to keep it as a part of not just our language, but our very core and our being. So I want to focus a little bit on an idea that I want to call first order discourse within Christianity. And I'm borrowing this from a moment from one of my mentors, from a sermon that he preached at Candler School of Theology, that's at Emory, at their centennial a few years back. His name is Tom Long. He's a professor of preaching. What we engage in a lot of times is second order discourse, right? So I'm thinking about this from the Christian perspective. Second order discourse or second order thinking, it has us talking about the Bible. It has us talking about the Christian faith, about God, about Christ, about the Spirit. Tom Long says that we often get nervous when second order discourse starts to move into first order discourse. It's one thing to exegete or interpret the phrase, the bread of heaven, which is something Jesus says in the Gospel of John. It's another thing to encounter the bread of heaven in the flesh, to look it in the eye. I am the bread of heaven. Choose you this day whom you will serve. That's a quote from Jesus in John's Gospel. To encounter the bread of heaven in the flesh, to look it in the eye. That's first order discourse. I'm going to come back to that in a second, but I'm going to pause and take a page out of one of my mentor, Don Salyer's book, and say, I'm going to do a footnote for a second and step out of what I was just saying and confess or reveal something to you. And as much as I love the contemplative, I am a very narrative person, as you can tell. And it's no surprise that my own religious faith and spirituality, Christianity, is a narrative religion with 4 gospels of sayings and doings and the beings of Jesus at its heart. He taught in stories, parables, that pushed the listener and the follower and the communities overhearing him, pushed them to a deeper level of attention, an awakening, if you will. We live in stories that reveal our own attentions and connections. So in what follows now, and I'm coming back to where I was a moment ago, I'm going to tell some stories. One, because that's what I do. I love stories. It's what I know best. I'm going to tell at least 3, and I know I've got a time limit, but I promise it's going to fit. And it's all I have time for, and it's all you'll want from me anyway. A mix of my own stories, and then another story from someone else that I have permission to tell. It's my hope that in the stories, you'll be open to the possibility of what is ahead of you from tonight. How spirituality in connection to deeper meaning and purpose, the awakened life, if you will, is essential in our lives if we hope for flourishing for ourselves, for each other, for our communities, for the earth. And we have data now, too, to say that it actually does help us flourish. So back to this first order discourse, I feel like I'm talking about Star Wars when I use first order language, but like in Star Wars, the first order makes us nervous. The first order discourse makes us nervous, and we've avoided it, especially, I think, in the church, in the ways in which we haven't shaped a couple of generations like we could have. And it feels very familiar to me in Dr. Miller's work. She didn't talk about this much tonight in her presentation, but if you read the book, you'll learn about something called synchronicity. This idea when 2 apparently disparate events are joined at the level of meaning or consciousness. You've had this happen. We call it coincidence all the time, right? Being open to this synchronicity, paying attention to this, receiving it in our lives, to me feels a lot like leaning into first order discourse. In Christianity, this would be that encounter with the living God, especially in the person of Jesus or the movement of the Holy Spirit. And it would get named differently in other traditions, of course, but broadly in spirituality, it's this openness and awareness of these moments of connection on another level of meaning and consciousness. But it can feel and it can be quite scandalous. Take, for instance, a story from Diane Kamp, Professor Emeritus of Pediatric Oncology at the Yale School of Medicine. She says that when she was a young physician, she would have described herself as a post-Christian agnostic. But a number of experiences with her patients, traumatic experiences that she calls windows on heaven, maybe synchronicity, opened up for her a possibility of a renewal of faith. Her patients were all dying children, and one of them was a lovely 7-year-old girl named Anna, who was suffering from leukemia. Dr. Kamp, the little girl's parents, and the hospital chaplain were at her bedside when she died. Dr. Kamp remarked that seconds before Anna died, one of those things happened that was an intrusion of the holy into the mundane. Anna mustered just enough strength to sit up in bed and look around, and she said, "The angels, Mommy, do you hear them? Do you see them? They're beautiful. Do you hear the singing of the angels?" And then she was gone. Diane Kamp said the parents received this as the most precious blessing they could have ever possibly received. But the hospital chaplain, more comfortable with second order discourse, the second order discourse of psychotherapy to be specific, fled the room in panic, scandalized by what had happened, leaving the agnostic physician and the grief-stricken parents to deal with this mystery that transcends all understanding. Diane Kamp recounted this story and others in her book, A Window to Heaven When Children See Life and Death, and I'm so glad that she did. A glimpse, a moment of awakened attention delivered to us for our own deeper understanding into the depths and the meaning of the holy, the spiritual. She described a scandal of first order discourse. Some years ago, I was invited to the local Kiwanis group, which is made up of a mix of people. About half of them were mid-career folks like myself now, and then younger, and the other half of them were at or beyond the age and stage of retirement. And many of those older folks in the room that day were alumni of the college where I work, at Oxford College. They were mostly a bunch of old white men, no offense. I will be one of these days. And it's part of why I was invited. I was invited to talk to that group in particular, to give a state of the college, basically. I was pretty nervous about it because I knew what some of their questions could be for the religion guy. Lots had changed since they had been in school all those years ago. And after my talk, we had time for questions, like we will here tonight. There were a couple of easy questions, softballs about the infrastructure of campus, what students were studying these days, and then a pause. A hand shot up, and I knew the guy who had asked it. I was waiting for one of his questions. And into that silence, he raised his hand and he started speaking immediately. "I want to know how many Christians you've got on campus these days." He clearly had been waiting to ask the question. It's what he came for. I wasn't surprised to get it. I gave him a few of our demographics about our diverse student body, including our breakdown of several of the most populated Christian groups on campus. And then I said, as just about any college or university chaplain in the United States would and could say today, but the largest demographic is populated by our nuns. And then I gave him that percentage. And before I could even finish, he had interrupted me with his hand shot in the air, and he said, "Do you mean to tell me that there are Catholic nuns running around on your campus these days?" No. So not the N-U-N-S's, but N-O-N-E-S. He seemed satisfied for a moment with my answer, and then he was dissatisfied again because all these people were running around who claimed no faith, or that's how he saw it. But that's not true, and I explained it, and I said, while we may not be a campus of all Christians, I explained what I thought the nuns represent: seekers, folks who don't want to let you know where they are. Some agnostic, atheist, people who don't want what their parents had and they're figuring out what it is. But ultimately, a bunch of meaning makers, a bunch of people who need to be seen as meaning makers and who need to be engaged. It's why we need college chaplains doing the work that we do. So I took a moment to talk about why we're all spiritual creatures, just like we've heard tonight. I think we see this right now, just this semester, within the Christian tradition in the most recent events in Wilmore, Kentucky, and the Asbury Revival. If you haven't been following this, well, I don't know what you've been doing, but it's been huge. And we could spend some time critiquing that moment of 2 weeks straight of prayer in that chapel. 2 weeks of prayer and renewal and peace. But we better pay attention to it, because that's Gen Z leading it. The least religious generation being revived for 2 straight weeks. And a campus that was smart enough to let it unfold. I'm almost done. But I want to leave you with a final story and experience that I had early in my time as chaplain at Oxford College. It was the end of the first semester, and I was attending the winter chorale concert, your typical December concert with incredible music, good direction, a wonderful strings ensemble, a lively atmosphere. Everybody was looking forward to the break ahead. The string ensemble performed in the middle of the concert, one piece before intermission and then another one after we came back from intermission. The piece they welcomed us back with was Bach's Concerto in D minor. Only something was different about this piece than every other piece that night, with both the chorale and the string ensemble. This time, well, on every other piece, a professional accompanist played. But on this piece, Bach's Concerto, one of our students sat down to play the piano accompaniment. And she sat down without a single bit of sheet music. She was playing it all from memory. And I'm sure she had practiced and practiced and practiced this. I stretched my neck around the people in front of me to get a better look. Sure enough, there was no music there on the piano, all from memory. And she was doing quite well until we were a couple of minutes into the piece. And she just stopped. No one quite knew what was happening. The other students playing were clearly confused until we could hear her faintly whisper, "I'm so sorry, I messed up." She looked at them, they looked at her. Then she turned to look at her choral director, Dr. Arquette, who was sitting off stage, who looked at her and calmly said, "Start again." So she did. They began again, and it was even better this time. A couple of minutes in, though, it happened again, almost at the same spot. "She forgot her place again," the person next to me said. The room was awkwardly quiet for a moment, like it is right now. And just at the beginning of her apology, as a bright shade of red filled her face, one by one, people started clapping, and then they stood up. People started yelling her name, students did. And they just erupted in this applause, astonishing applause, and we were overwhelmed, and so was she. I found out later that night, I went up to talk to her, that she had practiced at length for that moment. She told me it wasn't supposed to be like that. But you all saved me. You saved me. Yeah, we did, didn't we? The audience recognized something in that moment. We recognized something in that moment, and I'm convinced that that's why we erupted in our spontaneous applause and turned the way that it was supposed to be into the way that it was. I think about that moment on that night in our chapel a lot, of how we encountered that student and how she encountered us, of how she said that we saved her. She was embarrassed, and the crowd read that in this moment of spiritual connection and meaning, maybe even synchronicity. We were paying attention to her deeply in that moment, leaning in, paying attention, and she said that we saved her. Now, in Christianity, salvation, my understanding of it, we've got some scholars in the room who might correct me, but my understanding of it sort of just means health. It means wellness. It means this idea of well-being, wholeness. And that salvation, that health, that well-being that night came in unexpected applause. Turning what was supposed to be into what it was. I think about that moment a lot. I think about how it was spiritual connection. How she and I talked about that afterwards, perhaps synchronicity of how the wise heart seeks knowledge. And what it has to do with this right now, well, I'm going to leave you to think that out.
So if I didn't know any better, I would have said that we have talked before coming here. And we have put together our presentations, haven't discussed everything, because everything is so interconnected. It's amazing. So, you started with a briefing, and I want to add to that, if I may. I want to ask you, if you're okay with standing up, please go ahead and stand up. And if you're wanting to stand up, you can have your eyes open. Those right, just begin to open your arms to the side and all the way up as you inhale. And really take that deep breath into your lungs and feel your lungs. And now exhale and bring your arms down. Next time, inhale through your nose and do the same thing, expanding your arms as if you're opening two wings all the way up above your head. And exhale through your mouth, releasing and letting go all of the things, everything you can. Just letting go of the tiredness. You can sit in a chair for a while. Maybe roll your shoulders a little bit. Now I'm going to invite you to so one of the things we just did is we all connected primitively. And I'll ask you this question. Who was the one who decided to stand up? What would you say to the answer to that question?
Us.
I asked, but then who decided to do it?
Each one of us.
Each one of you. So it's the I. I remember one time, as you heard in my background, I have been studying Islamic Sufism for the past 30 years of my life. And honestly, there was a time where I walked away from religion. I said, I'm a nun. And I was really done in some ways. But then I discovered Islamic Sufism, and it changed my world and my worldview towards spirituality. And one of the great experiences I had was with my spiritual teacher, Professor Nader Anbal. So I was exploring, learning, trying to learn psychology in graduate school, and I asked him once, I said, okay, well, I know that part of who we are is our genetic background. And I do understand that our environment has a lot to do with who we become. So if I am the product of those two, then what am I doing? Then it's all predetermined. What is my role in all that? So you have to draw a large circle in the outside, and that was the environment. Then he had me draw another circle in the inside, and he said, okay, well, that's your genetic background, everything you bring with you. And then he asked me to draw another circle right at the center and right on. He said, that's who you are working with. That's who you are, which is completely, it's affected by everything. However, that I is untouchable. That I is the soul that is the same in all of us. So that part is exclusive to each one of us, and it is interconnected with all of us. So, so let me start with saying thank you so much for putting this event together. Thank you so much for all the help you gave us, Becca. Lisa, thank you for introducing me to them. And Heidi, thank you so much for introducing me to Lisa. And Heidi, thank you so much for the interfaith activities we've had. And thanks to the tornadoes and storms that brought us together closer in Texas, right? And then with that being said, thank you to all the friends who are here, and thank you to all the students who are here. Thank you to our department chair who encourages me to do this kind of work, and my family who's here. So I want to ask you with this thank you, how many of you have learned to be thankful in your religious practice? That's pretty much everybody. So often when we look at our practices, there's a lot more similarity than any difference. And this thanks, and now we're going to get into science a little later, but this thank you, this appreciation and gratitude that we need to have toward everything does so much that every religious tradition will tell you to be thankful and give gratitude, right? So, I want to tell you a story though. If you have heard about Mullah Nasruddin, the name Mullah Nasruddin. All right, so Mullah Nasruddin, some people from Middle East have heard about Mullah Nasruddin, and Mullah Nasruddin was actually an ethical figure who teaches stories about life through sarcasm. And well, for us Persians and Middle Easterns, where our lives are intertwined with poetry and literature, and we learn how to live based on poetry and literature. So one of the stories about Mullah Nasruddin is that one day he lost his key, and he was looking frantically all over the house for his keys. So he goes from one room to another, and then as he's searching for his key, his wife notices that, okay, well, he can help him. So he walks up to him and says, Mullah, can I help you find the key? He says, sure, please help me. And then they start looking together. She says, where did you lose your keys? He says, I lost it in the backyard. And she says, well, why are you looking for it inside the house? And he says, well, because it's already dark outside and there's no light. Isn't that what we do with so much of what is going on? I learned that the hard way. I came from a background where in my childhood, talking about trauma and trauma growth. Thank you for that introduction. Because in my childhood, I was born in a family where mental illness, specifically schizophrenia, was present in one of my siblings. And for me, ever since I was born, I saw this happen. And I was questioning, why do we do what we do? Why are these ups and downs in emotional reactivity and mood and everything else that's going on? So I learned to tune in. I really learned well to tune in. By the time I was in my early 20s, that became a problem because I could tune in too quickly and too fast. And it was almost like I was not here, I was there more than I was here. So then I learned, okay, well, there is something going on. This is psychology, so I need to go learn psychology. So I went to school and I studied psychology. And then later I realized, okay, you know what, I need to go deeper into this. So I went and got my graduate degree in counseling. And then I got out of the counseling program and I was still like, I was still lost. I was still looking for answers. Not that I didn't get anything. I learned a lot about theories. I learned a lot about how to help people, a lot about cognitions and emotions and how it all affects our health and how we need to balance all of that. However, I still felt like something was missing. And when I went deeper into the question, it was kind of like, am I looking for the key in the right place? Am I looking for it in the backyard where I lost it? Because that's what I learned from Suddhism. What I learned was that instead of looking out there, let's come back here and look inside. So one of the things my students will hear about it so much in my classes is that the sooner you can help a client turn the lens of their cameras from outer world to their inner world, the sooner they can start seeing results. So in that process, our job as counselors is to help them. Let's stop talking about everybody else. Yes, everybody else is, everything is going out there and everything is affecting us. But let's look in here. Let's look in here and how we are responding to all of that. Because there's something is happening inside of us that is beyond the physical body. So I asked you to stand up and do some deep breaths, moving your body, right? So the one who made the decision to do it actually was you, right? So if we start paying attention to our layers, first we have the physical layer, we have the emotional layer, we have the cognitive layer, and then we go into the spirituality and the spiritual layer. And so often people will say, well, what do you mean by spirituality? So I do Tamarcos classes, which is sleep meditation classes. And the first thing we do in every sleep meditation class is let's check in. Let's find out how it's going, what is going on with your body. So let's scan the body from the head all the way to the toes. Let's find out what is going on with your emotions. What emotions are you feeling? Let's find out what is going on with your thoughts. What are your thought waves? Now, let's pay attention to the fact that when we talk about these different layers, we're going from the more dense layers to the more delicate and subtle layers. So we do know today, thanks to science, we do know that everything is wave, right? This is a more condensed wave. My words that are coming to you and you're hearing them as sound is a much more subtle, delicate wave, but it's all wave at the end of the day. So when we connect with these wavelengths, going back to the alpha wave and the brain waves and all of the things that makes us who we are, then we're looking at the more condensed wave coming to the more subtle and the more subtle. So what is spirituality when we talk about spirituality? So in Sufi practices, one of the things we do is we go to that other. So in Sufi practices, we're looking at electromagnetic waves of the body, and we have 13 electromagnetic. Can't hear me. So we have 13 electromagnetic centers in the body, and the alignment of these 13 electromagnetic centers help us with our cohesiveness that we were talking about earlier. So we have the physical body, emotional body, the mental body, and the spiritual body. And each one of them is affecting us. And connection of these layers and how synchronized they are with each other determines how healthy we are physically, emotionally, and spiritually. So one of the things you notice is the shepherd's cane. Shepherd's cane is a connection between all of the 13 electromagnetic centers. And in most religious traditions, when you go to the origin, you will hear about the shepherd's cane. So, all right. So the 13 electromagnetic centers are two of them are right here up in the crown of the head. We have one at the third eye, one at the very center. If you draw a line in between your above your ears and right behind the third eye, the point of connection would be another one at the third ventricle in the brain. Then we have one at the brainstem, one in the throat, one in thymus, one in the heart. And there are actually three in the heart plus the source of life in the heart. And the source of life is the most important one that I'll talk to you about later. And then we have one in the solar plexus and one in the coccyx. So all of these have to be connected and working in harmony with each other. Now, thanks to science today, we know that our polyvagal nerve is extremely important in balancing the polyvagal nerve is extremely important in treating trauma, for instance, because we hold on to all of the trauma, all of the unpleasant events that happen in our lives where we are getting disconnected between our emotions and our cognitions and our physiological sensations. So in therapy, especially in trauma therapy, what we're doing is we're bringing all of them together. And Like when we talk about the solar plexus, you know, everybody I'm sure here has noticed, when you get anxious, where's the first place you feel it? Right here at your solar plexus, right? Because the bundle of nerves here get activated. And then if it happens repeatedly, then it weakens that energy source within our body. So, all right, so the research in electromagnetic field is really important, and our connection with that electromagnetic field and balancing it is really important, which is where we did some research in psychotherapy with two other colleagues from Sufi Psychology Association, and of course the outcome was that even though we didn't specifically talk about any religion, but doing the practices was helpful in making quicker change in healing therapy. Now, we do have, now one thing I do want to also mention is that originally when we started psychology, the word psyche, when you look at the root of the word, the definition is soul and spirit. And of course, logi or logi is the study of. So originally, that's what we started with psychology, study of the soul. But now we are spending more time actually in the other layers than the soul. So, so there have been psychologists who have actually paid attention to. We have Alford, we have James, we have Jung, we have others. You know, the contemporary psychologists, thanks to your research in this field, we need to go back to the origin of psychology, because it can help us not only on a spiritual level, but also mental health, physical health, and bring all of that balance together. The other part is, I want to show you we talked about gratitude at the beginning, and I want to show you a diagram. Thanks to HeartMath Institute, you know, in all religion traditions, there's a reference to the heart, paying attention to the heart. We heard about the heart. How many times today? I wish I had counted the number of times we all mentioned the heart, because all of the religious traditions bring us back to the heart. Now, HeartMath Institute has done fabulous research, and they actually measured the electromagnetic field of the heart, and they found out that the amplitude of the electromagnetic field of the heart is 60 times that of the brain. 60 times that of the brain. So in Sufism, we talk about the first brain, second brain, third brain. But we have the bottom-up model, where the brain is a very important system in our body that regulates all of our activities, actions and reactions and logic, and it is all done by the brain. However, the knowledge of the heart far surpasses the knowledge of the brain, because all the brain can do is it can compare and contrast everything it is seeing today to everything else collected over the years. And of course, we go back to the collective unconscious. So it's all a compare and contrast that is happening in the brain. So even in the heart, you notice that the heart rate changes when you give gratitude. So I was being very selfish at the beginning, giving all my gratitude to you. It does affect my heart rate right at the beginning, even when I'm considering that gratitude and truly, honestly, giving that appreciation to those who make a difference in my life. So as a practice, it is really important for us to remember that, and remember that how similar all religious traditions are in bringing us back to the source and to the source within us. So with the heart, again, all religious traditions bring us back to the heart, and it's really important to remember the connection between the heart and the brain. I want to use a quote by the Sufi master, Professor Sadiq Ahmad, that says, "Enlighten the channel that extends from your heart to your brain, and do not allow the heart and the brain to live apart like two unfriendly neighbors unaware of each other." enlighten the channel that extends from your heart to your brain. Again, thanks to the research we have now about how the little nerve that goes from here all the way down. That we know that this connection is also, it is what helps us stay balanced, stay centered. The other example I want to use is the example of the sea. So, we all have a heart. We know that that is the similarity between all of us, even if our brain doesn't function the same. But we pick up vibrations, and now we know, in especially treating trauma, when we are sitting in front of a client who's gone through traumatic experiences, synchronizing our breathing with that client is going to help them in the process of their healing. Our energetic body is going to affect them, help them calm down if they're too anxious. If I'm an anxious therapist sitting in front of an anxious client, chances are higher I'm not going to be able to help them because I am not centered within myself. So I need to make that change. But using the example of the sea is really important. This is something that, again, my teacher, Professor Dr. Anwar, emphasizes as a tool, as a way of looking at everything in the universe. So it's a question of, have you planted anything? Has anybody not planted anything here? Okay, everybody has planted something, right? All right. So when you plant a seed, whether it's a bean or any kind of seed or any kind of bulb, how does that bulb or seed know to become what it becomes? So you plant an apple seed. How does it know how to become an orange? Have you ever asked yourself that question? How does it know? Why does it know? But it knows. Every seed that you plant knows exactly what it's going to become. And we are reminded in Sufism that it's that knowledge within each one of us that knows. So when we talk about our connection with God, people ask me, so at one point I remember actually the Sufi master told us, forget about the word God, just put that word aside, because we get too confused with the definitions that we learned in books and from other people, and we hang on to that. Let's drop all of that. Let's start fresh. Let's forget about the words, but let's come back to the seed. How does the seed know to become what it is? If you and I go back, remember before we had the brain, before our limbs and everything else grew, there was nothing but that heartbeat. Have you all seen that in when my daughter, when I was pregnant, the first thing you could see was just the limbs. And it was the most beautiful thing. And that heartbeat knew how to develop the eye and the ear and the nose. Ear and the nose. Sometimes it can be confusing. And the limbs and everything, all the kidneys and everything else. It knew. I never told it, right? I was a mom. I never told it how to do that. They didn't know how to become a beautiful lady. So if we can go back to that source within the heart, perhaps we all find the same answer. Despite our religious background, despite our cultural background, despite our racial background. So as long as we have a heart, as long as we're going back to the source, we can find that reality within ourselves. So with that being said, I do like to end with a poem by Rumi. How many of you have heard of Rumi? All right, a lot of you, wonderful. So Rumi, for those of you who haven't heard of Rumi, Rumi is a 13th century Sufi poet who communicated through his poetry and dance, and communicated his messages from his experiences with the war. And he says, "What is to be done? For I do not know myself. I neither Christian nor Jew, nor Zoroastrian nor Muslim. I am not of the east, nor of the west, nor of the land, nor of the sea. I am not made of earth, nor of water, nor of wind, nor of fire, nor of the divine throne, nor the carpet, nor the cosmos, nor the mineral. Neither of this world, nor the next. I am neither of heaven, nor of hell. My place is placelessness. My trace is tracelessness. 'Tis neither body nor soul, for I am the soul of souls. I have cast aside duality. I have seen the two worlds in one. One I see, one I know, one I see, one I see. So thank you again for the opportunity. I really enjoyed being with you all, and thank you for setting the stage for all.
Okay, thanks so much to all of you for your remarks and comments. I really appreciate it. In the interest of keeping us close to on time, I want to give those of you who are in the audience tonight a chance to ask some questions of our panelists. And you can ask the questions of them collectively, or if there is a particular individual to whom you'd like to address your question, feel free. So if you just raise your hand, and if you stand up, I don't have a crowd mic, but if you can project, I think we can hear you, and we can acknowledge anybody and address your questions. Yes, ma'am.
I can't remember who said it, but someone, I think maybe it was you, Dr. Marie, the idea of the skeptic being the bouncer for everything else. And that resonates so much, being in like the science field. And I am curious what you see as the path forward, both for like the individual and collective, to calm down the skeptic energy, and then like invite in the other elements, the mystic. And you spoke to it to some extent, but I would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Summarize that question for me.
Sure. The question is about the skeptic, and skeptic being the gatekeeper or the bouncer, and particularly with reference to the sciences, how someone, especially working in a scientific field, can calm or tame the skeptic. Reasonable enough summary?
Yes.
Marvelous question. A wonderful study was done about 10 years ago, 2015, in which scientists who have made field-changing discoveries were surveyed. And it turned out that across disciplines, whether it's physics or computer science, 70% of these scientists who have made field-changing discoveries said that it was through inspiration, a dream, a moment in their prayer life. It was through a form of what I'm calling awakening, right? Mystical experience, intuition, deep knowing, direct knowing. The traditional apple on the head. The question was found. Now the rollout is pretty straightforward, right? But posing the question, the breakthrough that allows us to ask something that hadn't been asked before, that emanates from a new configuration of meaning, a deeper, more resonant form of understanding. The question was inspired. The method was rather straightforward. And I think that's a beautiful finding, because it shows that actually inspiration, mystical awareness is alive and well in scientists. But it's incumbent upon us to own and give voice to the multiple forms of knowing through which science is produced. The narrative of delivery is linear. The narrative of delivery is logical exposition, but it does not reveal a temporal exposition. It's just a logical exposition of the findings. And maybe we would be better scientists if at the end of each article, we told the story of how the question came.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Good questions. Yes, sir.
Yes, certainly nowadays it feels like in the realm of scientific thought and the emphasis on empirical study that the sense of spirituality of the human being is often downplayed. That's something Dr. brought up multiple times. It's so wonderful to see how these things are promoted. In the my diagram you had at the beginning, religion and spirituality overlaps. And though they're not exactly the same religion, tends to be the way people engage in this. So the question for all three of you would be either in your research, your clinical practice, or with spiritual intervention on campus. How do you promote or engage that sense of spirituality in the people you work with? When nowadays it feels like the discussion of religion or the engagement with religion on a personal level is dissuaded upon or ignored.
So quick summary of the question, for those who didn't hear. The gist of it is, how in their work do they engage and promote spirituality and spiritual inquiry when many people today are suspicious of or wary of religion? And so religion, which is typically and most commonly the path to spirituality, is something that is not readily accessible to as many people today as it was in the past.
Yeah, I love this question. I deal with it all the time, right, in the college setting, because in college, we're there to learn, use our brains. We go along with that. And so for me, as a chaplain, who is already going to come, people already have a set of assumptions about me, right? I'm the chaplain, that's the religion guy. I don't need to know the religion guy. I don't want to do that. So for me, I've got to earn some trust, either because I'm the religion guy and people have had a specific experience with religion, or they have no experience with religion or spirituality, maybe. So I don't know if this is going to answer your question, but what I do is I put myself in a whole lot of places with a whole lot of different people. So I put myself in, I let students see me doing things with scientists. I want students to see me collaborating with ResLife, and these are, so that there might be some trust built in another space, so that then when it comes time to engage those deep questions, like, oh, that guy, he was, I could go talk to him. He was pretty safe in that environment. That's the easiest answer I give you and the quickest to that question, how I do it.
So in the world of therapy, what we do is, we talk about cultural humility and understanding the role of the client. And we talk about phenomenological role of the client, meaning that I am looking from the world from my perspective, that I want to understand where you're coming from. I want to see the world with your glasses, not mine. So immersing ourselves in that world to be able to understand the world as a client is really important, and honoring that. And whether there are religious biases, whether there are religious negative experiences, honoring. And then from there, we open the doors to understanding, again, like I said, finding that strength within you. What is working within you? Because if we're working from within the individual, again, talking about all of the strength that is coming from within, that is the same for everybody. It's not that different. That answers.
Thank you for the question. I'll answer with a story. I gave a talk in Salt Lake City about 12, 15 years ago, and in a very large auditorium, in the very back row, there's a gentleman, probably his mid to late 70s, who just beamed love. And next to him was his spouse, an equally loving wife, who just beamed love. And I couldn't take my eyes off them. So I'm talking, but I'm looking at the loving couple. And at the end, I raced right up to the loving couple. And his name was Dr. Gary Weaver. He'd worked for 36 years with court-preferred boys. The third time before the judge, they had a choice. You can go to grown-up prison, adult prison, or you can go out into the Moab with Dr. Weaver. And given that choice, they went to the Moab, and there he helped them rediscover their birthright, their inborn birthright for a relationship with who I call God. He loved these boys. Now, most of these boys had been terribly abused and had become abusers. No one much wanted to work with these boys. No one else much loved these boys. Dr. Weaver loved these boys. And out there in the Moab, he did two things. First was that we are not there until everyone has crossed the line, relational spirituality. So they would climb up with us and go for hours with minimal water. Then it was time to dinner, but we don't eat dinner until everyone has gotten here. Relational spirituality. And the second thing he did, I'd like to share with you here now, because if you find yourself in the presence of someone cut off, there's two ways they may have gotten there. One could truly be the atrophy of the spiritual core. Not much of the 2/3 of grace has come their way in our culture as it stands. But it also could be that perhaps through spiritual injury, they got there, where they met someone who talked the walk but didn't walk the walk. And it could have been a small bit of hypocrisy, or it could have been, as in the case of these boys, violation. And it could have been a parent or a grandparent or teacher, whoever it was. But he helped them reclaim their birthright. And if I might share this 90-second practice, this is in the language of life. So I'm going to invite you to close your eyes and clear out your inner space. Your inner chamber. I invite you to set before you a table. This is your table. And to your table, you may invite anyone, living or deceased, who truly has your best interests in mind. Anyone living or deceased who truly has your best interest in mind. And with them all sitting there, ask them if they love you. And now you may invite your higher self, the part of you that's so much more than anything you might have or not have, anything you've done or not done, your true, eternal higher self. And ask you if you love me. And now finally, you may invite your higher power, whatever word is yours, however you know your higher power, and ask them. And now with all of these people sitting here right now, what do they need to share? What do you need to know? What do they need to tell you? Yeah, back. This is your counselor, and they are always there for you. Who shows up and change depending on where we are in our room, and then we can ask that what's on our heart. This is our birthright. We shared that practice, and I always honor Dr. Weaver for teaching that practice, sharing it forward. With professionals, with healers, with teachers, with kids living under the Brooklyn Bridge on an inpatient unit in Germany, where a young man turned to me and said, I find that very relieving that no one can ever take this away.
Let's take one final question, yes.
I have a question here to Dr. Miller. You talked about how the problem with technology technology nowadays is not the technology itself, but the way that we use it. So I was just wondering, how would you go about changing the way that, individuals in society as a whole use technology to use it for religious or spiritual results rather than the negativity that comes with that?
So just make sure everybody heard. So he's talking to me about cell phones, and he was asking, given that Dr. Miller has argued that the real problem with cell phones and with those technologies is not the technology itself so much as the underlying messages that are conveyed from society through those technologies. He's asking, well, how would she recommend transforming the culture such that these uses are more spiritually, religiously conducive and more conducive to human flourishing?
Thank you. That's a beautiful question. And is it your thought that you may do something about it for?
I don't know.
I think your question is a beautiful question, and perhaps you'll be one of the people to contribute another way of being
Mhm.
as it's expressed culturally and delivered through the phone. So when we use our deep birthright, what I'm calling our awakened brain, our deep spiritual awareness, everything shifts. And I share this, actually, I'm so sorry, I know we're out of time, so I'll just bring up a chart. Oops, no. Well, okay. Can I pull up my last one? I want to show this, it's very, very important. Nice, thank you. Our society minus the spiritual core has become radically transactional. And so if you ask someone who's 18 or 20 or 25 who they are, they're going to say who they are and what is life about without a spiritual core. Who am I? I am the one that took 4 APs. I am the one that did varsity tennis as a sophomore. Actually, I'm in the bottom quarter. I was cut as a junior. I am my outward performance. The radically transactional public squares in which we know ourselves in our performance. Let's put that on the phone. What does it look like? Here's my vacation. Here's my personhood that I've airbrushed and changed. I'm parts and pieces. It's a transactional to yourself and who we are to one another. Let's tell it another way. Who are you? When you walk into a faith community, who are you? It doesn't matter if my dad just made $10 million or is going to jail. Who am I? I'm a soul on earth. And you see me that way. I'm a child of God, and so are you. It's a whole other way of knowing. Now, what is it to be so smart and be at this great university? That is a gift, it is an endowment through which I might carve my calling, my contribution. It is not who I am. So when things are tough, and today, yes, I took 4 APs, but now I'm a freshman and I'm here at an excellent university, and I'm what? In the bottom quarter? That's disappointing. But it is not an annihilation of who I am, because I am much more than oh so smart. I am on a purposeful path to clean the water, to teach, to care for our society, to help our country, to serve God, whatever our calling might be. And that disappointing news is just noise on the trajectory of my greater purpose, my calling. So life with a spiritual core, if I'm a soul on earth, you're a soul on earth. And our relationships about interest, encouragement, but it's not about you got the 96 and I got the 82, or what? You took my boyfriend or girlfriend, what? It's not about narrow competition. And I think that frame of reference can inform any form of discourse or communication, because it's simply working from a deeper, truer part of ourselves. We've disintegrated the spiritual core from the whole person, and disintegration, here is unhealthy. And you've put us back, you've made us whole. Both use the word whole. So this can inform anything from social media to any form of poetry, music, art, even in the form of video game. How do we get ourselves whole?
All right, we have one more. Quick.
So I work with children, and you talk about units of empathy. I think to see that lived out, to watch a young child navigate the earth, they just feel this deep connection to everyone and everything, and there's no hierarchy. All wonderful. And so my question, I'm a director of an elementary school, and I'm like, how do we preserve that? Not have to regain the birthright, but hold onto it from the beginning. And so is there a way, looking neurologically, looking developmentally, at the stages like where you say in adolescence, they have this like kind of abyss that they have to then climb. Is there a way that we can solidify that core in such a way that it carries them through? And what can schools do to help that happen? Like,
So in a nutshell, real quick, for those who didn't hear, how can we preserve the inherent intuitive spirituality that young children have, instead of having to lose it and then have to recover it later in life? Are there things that schools and others can do to help young children preserve that intuitive spirituality that they have?
It's such a beautiful and important question, and both through the lens of basic science and using that roadmap of science, we looked at spiritually supportive schools for 3 years of all faith traditions and those that were spiritual but not religious, Catholic schools and yeshiva and Sufi schools. And what we found was things that you probably already are doing, that in the deep relational culture of the school, and my hunch is you're already doing much of this, and probably all of it, there were common, deliberate ways in which relational culture is formed. All of these schools, some were highly resourced, some were quite under-resourced, some were in West Philly and Oakland, some were in highly resourced. A practice of transcendent awareness that was not only quieting the mind, but knowing ourselves as receptive, the catch and the catchers, and through prayer, through contemplative, that an 8th grade boy could do. Form of receptive, sacred, transcendent practice, and turn to God for guidance in times of difficulty. All these schools are doing that. A language of the sacred, the transcendent, the immanent. It was different. It was ultimately culturally attuned because it empowered that faculty, that school had to use their own language. Practice of transcendence language, the keeper of the flame, a clergy person, a chaplain, someone whose full-time real job it is to stand up at a faculty meeting. Really beautiful voices and speak spiritual values. We see we're going to throw the student out. What do our spiritual values really say? And so on. And we put these together, this gift, spiritually supported schools, and it is free and available to all people through the Awaken School Institute. That's how we transfer it. So you're welcome to join us. It's every year, the Awaken School Institute for K-12 spiritual core and culture. Wonderful. And cultural education.
thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Miller, Reverend Case, Dr. Norrie. Thanks for a really thought-provoking and very wide-ranging, but at the same time, I think unified and a very important discussion to really important topics. Thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. We really appreciate you being part of our Center for Faith and Learning Spring Symposium. We hope that you don't mind if we contact you in the future to let you know about our future events, other symposia and programs that we will put on. If you did not get a packet with a book, please pick one up. There's some on the table in the back on the way out. Those are complimentary. They are with the compliments of Dr. Miller. We really appreciate that. So one for everybody. Have a safe drive home, those of you who are not on campus, and we will see you at our next meeting.
Put the book in.